Hello, good evening or afternoon or morning, depending on which time zone you're tuning in from. Welcome everybody to this, our fourth annual Collective Voices Symposium here at Secure Families Initiative. My name is Sarah Strader, and like many of you, I am an active duty military spouse. I am also the executive director of Secure Families. Today's event is going to be part one of this year's symposium event. Our theme is Seen, Heard, and Empowered, Know Your Rights for Military Families. I'm going to give a brief overview of how today's event is going to go, and then I'm going to hand the microphone to my colleague, Brandy Jones. So in a moment, Brandy Jones, who is our organizing director here at Secure Families, Brandy leads our member programs here, is the visionary behind this very event, as of with much else that we do here at SFI. Brandy is going to kick off this event by sharing some framing remarks before we launch into the kind of meat of our discussion today. Next, we're going to welcome our first guest speaker, Libby Jamieson, who will talk about the foundational rights afforded to military spouses, both the obvious ones we all know about, as well as the lesser known ones. And SFI's regional organizer, Shalina Critchlow, will moderate that section. Next, we're going to welcome two additional guest speakers, Lydia Owiti Otieno and Liliana Bolanos. We will moderate a conversation with Lydia and Liliana where they will share expertise regarding immigration concerns for military families and the impact that things like documentation and citizenship status have on one's rights and access to them. And then to close, we will return back to Brandy, who is going to be in the spotlight to leave us with some motivational parting words. I just want to share one final comment about today's event before Brandy kicks us off. If you are tuning in live and you see this video, you are more than welcome to send us things in the comments of this video. If we have time, we may be able to ask some audience questions of our guest speakers. We will have to see. However, I want to really stress and urge, if you have a question that is very personal and individualized, this is not going to be the best venue to be asking those kinds of case questions. But if your question is broad, policy-oriented, please feel free to. And like I said, we will ask as many as we have time later in the event. And then finally, following this event, if you are interested in connecting with anyone you hear from today, whether it's a member of SFI staff or one of our guest speakers, please feel free to send SFI an email and we will connect you. The email address is info@securefamiliesinitiative.org. All right, now that we know what to expect and how to conduct ourselves, Brandy, do you want to kick us off at this event?
Thank you so much, Sarah. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Like Sarah said, this is our fourth annual symposium, Collective Voices, hosted by our Caucuses of Color through our PCS safety program and campaign that we've been launched now for 3 years. So just having this moment to kind of talk through different issues that our families bring to us all the time, and like kind of centering it in the work that we do, which is like policy, which kind of goes back to the rights and the thing that our families all sacrifice to protect and defend our Constitution. I would always keep one handy, a copy. So thinking about that, you know, in the spirit of Dr. Martin Luther King, as we're celebrating Black History Month, and you know, the Black community are the creators of the civil rights movement and led us into these rights that we're all enjoying. We want to ground ourselves in words from Martin Luther King Jr., that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice anywhere. And as we think about that today, here at SFI, we are affirming a truth that has also, you know, been ignored, and that is that military families' experiences should not be invisible and that our rights matter. This symposium is about clarity, confidence, and connection. It's about understanding the systems that affect our lives and reclaiming our power within them. So thank you again. We're excited to talk through a lot of the questions that our members have posed to us, and in such a public way where we can all hear and kind of think about it as we get prepared to have a second session of the symposium next month. So thank you, Sarah. I'm excited to talk through with our guests today.
Me too, Brandy. Me too. All right, everyone. Thank you, Brandy, for framing us, for grounding us. We're now going to launch into the first section of our discussion today. And so to kick off this next section, I want to first introduce Shalina Critchlow. Like I said, Shalina is the regional organizer here at SFI. Shalina wears many hats, like we were joking earlier. She chairs our Indigenous Caucus, our Nuclear Nonproliferation Leadership Team. Shalina comes to this work with decades of experience as a former military spouse, a former military mom, man, spanning the generations. And so, Shalina, I would love to welcome you to join. And I know you're going to kick us off by sharing a little bit behind the little kind of colorful, granular details behind that lived experience I mentioned.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Brandy. Hi, everyone. Shalina Critchlow here. Yes, as Sarah has mentioned, I have multiple years of service, being a former military spouse and former military parent. I found myself in a situation in 2015, and that ended in a divorce. And so did I ever imagine having to navigate through a divorce? No, and I don't think anyone ever imagines or plans to get a divorce. Um, but I would like to share, this actually will be the first time that I share my story publicly. And a lot of my friends, close friends, family know everything that I went through. But saying this out loud and having to share this internally with Secure Families Initiative has really empowered me to kind of leave the feeling of being defeated, feeling dumb, feeling stupid, my situation kind of in the past. And so now I stand here before you telling my story with confidence, telling you with the lens of not feeling like I was dumb, I didn't know, or feeling like I should have known. So I'll say that, having three boys, having a son who served in the military himself, um, was a lot of work. And it was a lot of caregiving and a lot of sacrifice on my behalf, not just as a person, but as a woman, as a person of who comes from indigenous roots. And so I left that divorce with nothing. And when I say nothing, I mean nothing. And so I want you to really, really to hear that when I say that. And it means that I left with a finalized divorce decree with zero support. Um, and one I never signed before. It also makes me realize a lot of decades of caregiving for my three children and my support of the Marine Corps mission. And it was treated with the market value of $0. And so yeah, so it was a lot. It was a lot of gaps. I wasn't able to receive support for my family because I never had to navigate a divorce, especially from someone who was in the military before. Um, I didn't know a lot of the benefits that I was entitled to. I didn't know of some of the laws of the state that I was living in. I didn't know um, any of support that I could actually call on. And when I did call on to certain folks within the state, I was given, advice to put my big girl panties on. And so for me, having folks tell me that and I had been married since I was at the age of 17 years old. I didn't know anything about the legal system. I didn't know how to navigate a divorce. I didn't have any friends that had to navigate a divorce before. And so I just felt really defeated. And, and I eventually did leave that marriage with nothing. And that was in 2015. My divorce was finalized in 2017. We are now in 2026, and having worked with Secure Families Initiative, hearing different folks' stories and everything that they have gone through, I have been able to actually get here and get the support that folks need when they are navigating a divorce. And so, it kind of just like, man, I really didn't know anything. No one told me this. No one educated me on this. I didn't know the right questions to ask. I didn't know who I needed to reach out to. And so, it's today this event is amazing, and I think that this will hopefully bridge the gap with folks who are navigating, a divorce or having to go through a separation, and what it means to know what your resources are, what your support is. And so that's just a brief description of my story. There's a lot of layers to it, and there's a lot of context, and um, hopefully I'll be able to share a lot more in detail later at a later time.
Thank you so much, Shalina. Thank you. It is one thing to live through something, and it is another to have the courage to be able to share that with others so that they can feel like they are not alone having to navigate things and can learn and can connect. So I want to say thank you so much for being brave to share your story. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
All right, Shalina will be moderating the rest of this section with our guest speaker, whom I would love to introduce right now. So as promised, we are joined by Libby Jamieson, a Secure Families board member, an attorney, and an advocate with experience across the White House, federal agencies, and political campaigns. Libby's work includes 7 years as an attorney at the Department of VA, a year in the Senate office on Capitol Hill, and time at the White House as a senior advisor to the Joining Forces Initiative, supporting military and veteran families, caregivers, and survivors. Libby now leads E. Grace Law Firm, where she provides legal services, and S. Grace Consulting, where she advises on policy and advocacy strategy focused on the military-connected community. Really, no person with more perfect expertise to lead us through today's conversation about the foundational rights every military spouse should know that they have, especially around some of the things we've already talked about. So Shalina, Libby, welcome. And if Shalina would like to kick us off with questions, that'd be great.
Libby, thank you so much for being here. And I am so excited to ask these questions and hear your feedback. And the first question would be, what is the most common legal mistake you see military spouses make during separation?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me, and like Sarah said, for sharing your story. I'm also the former spouse of a service member who divorced after 20 years, and what you said just rang so true. Even as an attorney, it can be a really challenging and scary time. And as we know, like, the rules are different state to state. Like, there's so much to navigate on top of the just grief and loss of a relationship. And for me, not just the relationship with that person, but this community as well. It was like, how am I going to navigate forward in this space? So I'm so happy to see you here. I know I struggled with, how do I continue this relationship in this community? I'm happy to be here too. I'm glad we've continued to find our voices here, but thank you so much for sharing. And some of the biggest challenges, I think it's just that understanding, like what we're talking about here today. What are my rights when something like this happens, whether it's by your choice, whether it is sprung on you, because it can come from a lot of different directions, right? And so I think some of the immediate impacts to think about are housing, what happens with housing. And if you're in base housing, especially, understanding that that's governed by service and installation rules. So again, there's no one answer. You'll probably hear a lot of attorneys talk about it depends, because it's hard to say one size fits all. But typically, a spouse can remain in base housing and family housing during the process while you are still a dependent. For folks who still use that definer. But commanders, have a lot of discretion. We all know that, especially if there's maybe an acrimonious separation. But it's really once you have that final, like you talked about, that final decree, when you are no longer the dependent, And that's when, you know, a lot of these eligibilities are going to end. And there's typically a departure window around 30 days for base housing. So I think that's an important one to know, like, as you're looking and planning ahead, like what is the housing situation going to look like? Healthcare is another really big piece of it, and understanding how your coverage continues or doesn't continue through TRICARE. And so, you know, knowing that TRICARE does not automatically continue after a divorce. So again, once you have that final decree, and there are some exceptions. For me, I was a 20-20-20 spouse, which means we were married for 20 years that overlapped with 20 years of his service. So I had eligibility until I remarried, which we can talk about the patriarchal system that decrees that maybe at a different time. But so there are some bridge options that usually cost money and they're time limited. But again, making sure that you know, I appreciated what you said about not even knowing the questions to ask. And so, you know, understanding that TRICARE is healthcare is one of those questions to ask, and navigating that. I think another one that I see come up a lot is base access. And so, you know, are you still going to be able to get on and off base, especially if you have children and are getting into housing? And so again, for most folks, that eligibility is going to go away once that final decree is in place, outside of some of these exceptions for, you know, at the 20 year mark. But there can be carve outs. For example, like I said, if you do need that custody based access, but those are really limited and like purpose specific on a case by case basis. I think the other big issue that I see a lot with folks is trying to figure out the right jurisdiction for even filing. If you are the one pursuing a filing, or even if maybe your service member filed, but you think that's actually not the right jurisdiction. And so again, this is a question to have on your on your checklist to ask and to think about. You know, different jurisdictions have different rules when it comes to custody. And you were talking about support rules. That can be different state to state. And we know as military family members how different things can be in these different jurisdictions. And so thinking about that, the other big piece that I see come into play a lot of times is it's called the UCCJEA. It's a custody, I won't say the full name to bore people, but it basically governs child custody. And so that can be controlling in some cases. And a lot of times if there's been a recent move, or if a parent wants to move, which is quite frequent, you know, maybe you're in San Diego because that's where your service member is, but now with the divorce, you want to go home and be closer to your family. And so how do you navigate some of those jurisdictional issues are really important as well. And then I think the last big one that I'll say now is the like long-term or like the division of military retirement, or maybe TSP, or some of those financial benefits that are divided. And again, a lot of that will depend on length of the marriage, length of service. But there are a lot of folks hear the 10-year rule, the 15-year rule, the 20-year rule. And you can look those up, but understand that there are rules like after 10 years, you know, the retirement can be paid directly to you instead of relying on the service member to pay that. Like I said, it affects healthcare eligibility. Do you still have commissary and base access? And so the other big thing that I see is a challenge for a lot of folks when this is kicking off is getting that legal help. Like you said, you have maybe questions, maybe you don't even know what questions to answer. Where do you turn? You said you turned to, you know, state resources that maybe were not the most helpful. I will say JAG can provide information. They do a great job in uncontested divorces in many cases, but I think we all know a lot of times they are not uncontested. And JAG, the attorneys at JAG cannot represent someone in a civilian court if you are going and having to litigate and be in front of a judge. You are going to, civilian counsel is really helpful there. But then, making sure that you have counsel that actually understands, they don't have to have been a JAG themselves, but somebody that's done military divorces, and really, understands that. So that's before you even get into your other questions, you should be asking questions of your attorney. Have you done military divorces before? Do you understand how to divide a military retirement? Have you done out-of-state custody if that's going to be an issue? It's totally fair to ask those questions ahead of time. The last thing I want to say that comes up sometimes with JAG is maybe you go into your local JAG office and your service member beat you there and they say, we can't actually help you because it's a conflict. Don't just turn around and walk out. Ask. Sometimes I was an intern back in the day in the San Diego JAG office, and we had a list of referrals. I don't know if all the JAG offices still do that, but maybe they have a list of local civilian attorneys to refer you to, or ask. Again, I keep using San Diego as an example because that's where I spent so much of my time as a Navy spouse. But there was San Diego, Coronado, Miramar, MCRD, Camp Pendleton. Think about some of the other offices that might be able to help you that aren't conflicted out. So I could talk about this forever, but I will stop there.
Thank you, Libby. I want to actually touch on something, and I know you mentioned, like, when you are going through or navigating a divorce and you're residing on base, what about for folks who have bought a house, who don't live on base, and they're in a house, and, depending on what state you're in, I know some states require that you be separated for a year before a judge will finalize a divorce. For folks wanting to stay in the home and want the spouse to leave because they're raising children or whatever the case may be, what are their rights being at home, staying at home?
Yeah. And that's really challenging. And I will say that's a challenge in any divorce, not just in our community, is that going from one household to two households is very challenging, especially if there is only one income, which we know is the case in our community a lot, because maybe you've just moved and you left your job behind and now you find yourself in a new state and all of a sudden you have this divorce confronting you. And so that's something that either has to be mediated between the parties, especially if we're talking off base, or has to be taken into the court for a decision. And the courts can make temporary interim, decisions like, okay, mom is going to stay here in the house because, like you said, she, maybe she's the one doing the majority of the caregiving while the other spouse is away. But sometimes, if an agreement can't be reached by the parties, then sometimes it's something that has to be taken to be decided by the judge. And I'll also say, again, I know I hate to give the it depends answer, but it really is jurisdictional. The different states are going to have different, like you said, some require very long periods of separation before they'll even move forward, which I think is a really difficult and outdated way to handle things. But, it really does depend on the state and their specific requirements.
Thank you. And so the next question I have is, if a spouse can do only one thing early in a separation, what should it be?
Yeah, I think going to get that wise counsel, hopefully from somebody who knows what they're talking about. And even if I know, again, finances can be really tricky, and maybe you don't have several $1,000s in a retainer to put forward for an attorney, right? That's a serious challenge. Consider there are a lot of attorneys, I do this in my practice, who will do a limited scope, maybe just helping you respond to the initial paperwork, or even just an hour of time to advise you on the next steps. There are legal aid services that will offer, free or reduced services. It's a challenge though, because they are overburdened and sometimes not the most responsive. You can also check with your local bar association. So again, I'm going to keep using San Diego as an example. San Diego County Bar Association has a referral program. And so they can help connect you with an attorney. Again, you can go to them and say, I need somebody that does not just divorces, but understands military divorces. And they will have a list of folks with that experience. And also some of those bar associations will also have a moderate means or low income program where the attorneys have already said, we will help at a pro bono or low bono basis to help navigate folks through. But I think, we all know the spouse groups and the Facebook groups and the, like the barracks lawyers, and like, you're going to hear all kinds of advice, right? Like you can go online, you can even ask ChatGPT in this day and age, you can get all of the advice, but really finding that like trusted someone, an attorney who can help you navigate forward through all of that, it is really going to be the most important thing.
Thank you for that. That kind of went into the third question I had, but I guess to add an extra layer onto that, is there certain like verbiage or certain like keywords that when you are asking for pro bono or, an affordable, I guess, consultation or whatnot, is there certain words that we should be asking or saying, or maybe certain words from an attorney that would be like, oh, they know military law or have familiar, or they're familiar with military divorce?
Yeah. So on the finances side, I think there are a couple key pieces, and I've said them, and I probably should have explained them a little bit more. So pro bono means they're doing it free of charge. So completely pro bono. It's a lot to ask for, someone we're, making our livelihoods too. But there are pro bono is more going to be like maybe, a legal aid association, or JAG is essentially pro bono. If you and your spouse can reach an agreement and JAG can just help you write the paperwork up and make sure everything gets filed, they're not going to charge for that. Low bono is what some attorneys, and again, some like referral programs will do. They will help the attorneys find clients, but they have to offer a reasonable rate. And so that's kind of a reduced rate. So that's a good thing to ask for as well. Say like, look, maybe I understand you can't do this completely free, but can you do this, low bono, or do you want to offer a discount for military families? The other thing to ask too is, depending on the financial situation, again, if there's a lopsided income, because like I said, as we know, that is a challenge in a community with a 20% unemployment rate. That's a question to ask the attorney when you go talk to them. Are you willing to start this case and ask for attorney's fees from the other side? And so the courts can order that sometimes. It's a little risky for the attorney to maybe take the case on that, but maybe you do a reduced payment up front to get started and go in and ask the court to have the other side help pay your fees if you don't have an income stream at the time. Because it is, it is fair for both parties to have counsel. So that's kind of on the financial side. The one other thing I wanted to say about the attorney though is, oh my gosh, I'm going to completely blank on this. Oh, the limited scope. Sorry, old lady brain. Is what I talked about a little bit earlier, is asking them, look, maybe you can't come in and do the whole divorce and be in court if there's like significant litigation, but could you look at my paperwork and just help me with my paperwork? Or if we reach an agreement, could you just help us write down the agreement and make sure that it's fair and complies with the state law? And so that's another way to kind of rein it in and help with the expense. And so that's the term you want to use, is limited scope for that. And then as far as asking them about what experience, I think the other part of the question was asking about, how do we vet their experience with making sure they actually have experience helping military clients. Look at their reviews, look at their website, make sure they have actual reviews that talk about that they actually helped folks navigate through these. And ask them. I mean, you can ask them some questions, like, not to be gotcha, but like, do you know what a DD-214 is? Do you know what a TSP is? Like some of these things, and make sure that they actually seem to have some familiarity. Ask them about, what child custody cases have you done that involved military families, and how did you navigate those? So it's totally fine to ask those. Some attorneys might have a little bit of an ego, but most folks are going to understand that, you are doing your due diligence to make sure that you're finding somebody who actually understands. I mean, this is literally your life and your future on the line. So it's totally acceptable to really vet and ask those questions of folks.
Thank you, Libby. That was all very informative. I remember when I was kind of going through my situation, and I was calling on the state for, I believe this state had like an option where you could, what you mentioned is offer a, I guess like a referral type service at a low cost.
Yeah.
And so when I had called that number and said, hey, we're a former military family, my husband just got out, this and that. And the response I got was, well, I don't really know if our referrals really deal with like military law or anything like that. So at that time, it was just like another blow to me, because it was like, man, like, who do I call, or what do I do? And around that time, we weren't as like, I don't want to say we weren't as like resourceful when it came to like online resources or tools, because it definitely was there, but I didn't even know like what to what to look up. So if someone finds themselves in a situation where they're in a state and they are looking for resources through the state, and the state doesn't have any common knowledge of military or who they can refer, don't give up. And just like what Libby said, like, please do your research, Google, look at the reviews, ask those right questions. So thank you, Libby, for all highlighting that.
And if I can add one thing on that, I think that's so true. We think a lot about places like San Diego or Jacksonville or JBLM. I'm a Navy spouse. Can you tell? Say all the Navy, the Navy spots, but places with a heavy military concentration where you probably are going to find attorneys, even former JAGs who are really familiar with it. But if you're somewhere that maybe doesn't have as heavy of a military population, it might be hard to find someone who really has that experience. And so you can have exactly what you're describing. You call them, they're like, well, we don't know, which is good in a way. You don't want them to say like, yeah, sure, we can do that, when they don't actually know what they're talking about. But sorry, my dog is deciding to join. One resource, because I think I saw somebody asking about resources, is check out the American Bar Association. I'm, again, sorry, foggy brain here. I can't remember the exact name. I think it's like Homefront program, or if you look up their military services support division, they actually have a really great list there of resources, and it breaks it out by state, and it'll say like some of these are military specific, some of these are more general legal aid, but that's a really great place. And there's also, I think, ABA Free Legal Questions. I'm probably butchering what it's called, but check out the American Bar Association. That really starts at a national level, and then you can trickle down and find those state specific resources. Sorry.
Fabulous. Well, Shalina and Libby, thank you both so very much. This was super informative. And I think we've said it a couple times, but I want to like triple, quadruple foot stomp it. This is the kind of briefing or information I know I've not gotten anywhere else. And it's just so empowering to know that whether you're remaining within the military lifestyle or whether you're looking to transition out of it, no matter where stage you might find yourself in, all of us deserves to have information like this available to us because it helps us make informed decisions to allow us to be safe and have lives of dignity. So Libby and Shalina both, thank you very much for enabling that for folks today. All right, everyone, I am going to transition us now to the kind of second half of our part one. Gosh, we're quadrupling it a lot tonight, but we're going to be starting to talk about a new topic. Now, again, the theme of our symposium this year is knowing rights that we have, whether those are rights that were obvious, right, or less obvious than, say, the DoD dependent ID that I've got in my wallet. And in addition to talking about rights and our ability to access it, we want to talk about situations that can impact that access. And so separation and divorce is one example of a time where your rights and your entitlements and your access is fundamentally altered, both in the short and in the long term. But another example of a time where those baseline rights are impacted has to do with citizenship status and documentation status. And so as we transition to the second half of today's event, I just want to name that that's what we'll be focusing on. And so I also want to say that in the last, over a year, I think a lot of us have seen a lot more coverage of this as an issue, where someone's access to rights and to support can be impacted by those topics. And so this is a very timely conversation, and I'm very grateful that we have two guest speakers today who are going to help walk us through both some of the basics and leave us with some practical tips moving forward. I would like to start by introducing our first guest speaker for this section, Lydia Awiti Otieno. Hey, Lydia. Lydia is the founder and CEO of Foreign Born Military Spouse Network, a peer support group of over 6,000 spouses in outreach for belonging, advocacy, and empowerment. Lydia helps shape inclusive employment solutions and resource pathways for foreign-born spouses. Lydia is a lawyer, project management, and international development consultant, and a recent graduate of the Stand To Leadership Program at the George W. Bush Presidential Center. There's nothing Lydia can't do as far as I am concerned. Lydia, welcome. And I would love for you to kick us off just by sharing more about yourself, as well as the community that you are building and what was the gap that you saw that you wanted to help fill?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sarah. I also don't know what you cannot do. So the feeling is mutual. They say it takes one to know one. So here we are. Thank you for having me on, and it's a great honor and pleasure to be here to help support our community to understand our rights better. So as Sarah said, I'm the founder and CEO of Foreign Born Military Spouse Network, a national nonprofit serving immigrant spouses of U.S. service members. And our members come from over 100 countries represented in every branch of service, all 6. So foreign born military spouses sit at a very unique and often invisible intersection. They are immigrants navigating complex U.S. systems while simultaneously living within the military ecosystem, which assumes citizenship in many of its policies and structures. Now, this population has been a constant in our military since its founding. They are not new. But what's new now is that the population has grown rapidly, and yet systemically, structurally, and programmatically remain quite underserved. Now, they often fall between systems. The immigrant serving organizations don't always understand the military mobility. Military family programs don't often address immigrant realities, and policymakers, they rarely see that intersectional impact. So I stepped into this work because I lived it very painfully, unfortunately. I experienced firsthand what it feels like to lose professional identity, navigate immigration complexity, and support a service member while feeling very much structurally unsupported myself. So at FMSN, our mission is simple. We empower foreign-born spouses to overcome legal, economic, linguistic, and social barriers so they can become self-sufficient, and fully integrated and contributing members of both the military and American communities. And we do this by building a vibrant and supporting community, and because we know that's where help starts from, creating robust networking opportunities, and we deliver some comprehensive social, legal, and educational programming that fosters cross-cultural understanding to strengthen both their well-being and the stability of military families and the military mission, which definitely contributes to the prosperity of our nation. Now, our motto is no spouse left behind, because no one should really fall through those cracks as they live between intersection. And this population has been a constant and deserves to be fully part of the community they already sacrificed so much for.
Absolutely. It's an incredible network and community that you've built, and I am grateful that we get to share about it here in case anyone needs and wants such a community. I hope you look out and join. Thank you, Lydia. I'd also like to introduce our second guest speaker for this section, Liliana Bolaños, to the conversation. Liliana is a military spouse, like every one of us here, immigration policy advocate, and experience both in immigration law, legislative analysis, and community education. Liliana's journey from growing up as an immigrant in Utah to becoming a permanent resident fuels her mission to expand understanding and advance compassionate, effective reform. She currently contributes her expertise on policy impact and immigrant-centered program development to community organizations, policy committees, and creative projects. Liliana, welcome, and we are so grateful to have you.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much, Sarah, for that introduction. So excited to be here with you all today.
Awesome. All right, I'm going to ask a question, and I will leave it to both of you to chime in and share who would like to answer first. But I want to talk as the theme of today is talking about the impact, right, that citizenship or status can have on someone's rights or ability to access them. I want to start by laying a base level, because there may be folks in the audience today who are surprised to hear that not all U.S. service members and not all military spouses or children are U.S. citizens, although probably fewer people might be surprised by that now, but still. I was hoping one of you could briefly touch on the pathways to citizenship that U.S. military service has historically offered both service members and their eligible dependents, and then potentially an update on those pathways to citizenship, how they're currently either in effect or not at this moment in time.
Awesome. Liliana, you want me to take that first?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. So, excuse me. There are different parts, but the ones that we know documented and the ones we see every day is naturalization through military service. So the U.S. immigration law provides special naturalization pathways for non-citizen service members under the INA, Immigration and National Act. Particular sections 328, 329, so a service member who has served honorably for at least 1 year in the U.S. Armed Forces may apply for naturalization. That reduces requirements or waivers of standard residency rules, which is usually 3 to 5 years, depending. If the applicant served during a designated period of hostility, some requirements like physical presence or residence can be waived, always very dependent on the situation. Sometimes fees are waived and processing can be more flexible than civilian naturalization. I know my husband got his citizenship through the military, so I speak like I know what I'm talking about. So those provisions have existed for decades to support recruitment and readiness and continue to benefit a lot of eligible service members, though application has been inconsistent, especially in recent years. And there have been some changes in policies as well. So for spouses is a spouse naturalization under military specific provisions. Or before I get there, today actually in the morning, and I thought to myself, oh, I had prepared for this, but then there's someone from APU reached out and wanted to talk about, he heard that now the parole in place, PIP, is being used, and I wrote the note down. Recruiters have been using PIP to entice new recruiters into the military, particularly National Guard, saying if they have any issues with their immigration PAP can be used to help them avoid any negative consequences. And so he was just asking what's going on, and I'm like, well, I don't know, but I don't think that's why the PAP was formulated in the first place. So I wanted to say that before I forget. So as we go into spouse naturalization under the military specific provisions, we have 39B for to be specific. For spouses of U.S. citizen service members, there's a special provision that can speed naturalization. Under 319B, a lawful permanent resident who accompanies the service member abroad under official orders for at least 1 year may qualify for expedited naturalization without the formal residency and physical residency requirements that accompany any applications. This can be especially useful for families stationed or deployed overseas. Time living abroad under military orders may count toward eligibility. Now, it's good to note that this privilege still requires the spouse to already hold a green card, and there may be delays or administrative barriers for spouses to benefit from this. The third that I know is adjustment of status and family sponsorship. Still green card pathway for most spouses. The first step toward that is still permanent resident status, which is called green card, and it can start in many ways: fiance, visa, marriage, and stuff like that. So a U.S. citizen service member can file I-130. That is a petition for alien relative to sponsor their spouse. I know that is how I came. I got married and then we filed that. Once the I-30 is approved and a visa number is available, then the spouse can either adjust their status in the U.S. or complete consular processing abroad. I did mine abroad. I was still being stubborn and wanted to go to a different country to study, and was like, no, I'm not coming yet. So we did everything from overseas. And then after obtaining a green card, a spouse can later apply for naturalization, typically after 3 years if married to an active duty citizen and meeting other criteria. I remember for me, I broke residency, the 3-year continuous residency, when I got depressed and went back to Kenya. So when I came back and my husband left the military 2 years before we made the 3 years, I had to do the whole thing from the beginning. And now I didn't qualify for the 3 years. I had to wait for 5 years. So those are some of the things you have to consider, because there are some things attached, conditions attached. Now, this is the most common route that I know, but it can take years, and sometimes it's impacted by enforcement actions like we see now, and sometimes inconsistent processing. I know a few more. I don't know if you want to jump in, Liliana, or should I just continue?
Yeah, feel free to keep going. I have some in mind that I can include at the end if you haven't touched on them.
Alrighty. So there's parole in place, which is a form of discretion used by USCIS for undocumented family members of service members. So it can be a mother, a father, a spouse, whatever it is. I talked about it before, and I said some recruiters are using it now. So PIP, as we call it, can grant temporary lawful presence without status to spouses, children, and parents present in the US without inspection. With PAP, I know that eligible spouses can normally adjust status without leaving US, which avoids being barred from re-entry under normal immigration law. And it can also be renewed in 1-year increments and often includes work authorization. Well, now there have been some difference in application. Sometimes they're ignored in application, because we've seen things happening now, and some spouses being detained, arrested while they go to seek PIP, or they just denied. The processing time has really is so much longer. I'm reading my notes from what I got from our data today. It's really a lot harder for people to get PIP approval now, and there actually has been a fee that initially was not there. So now there's a $1,000 fee that has been touched into it, and the waiting has been so much longer. And because it's longer, the uncertainty about whether you're going to get it or not has increased. There's also deferred action for families. Deferred action is prosecutorial discretion that temporarily prevents removal and can allow work authors not grant lawful status or a path to citizenship by itself, but it buys time for other applications to proceed. So maybe PIP, maybe the green card one. So deferred action supposed. This one is similar to limitations to PIP. It depends on discretionary adjudication and really does not automatically protect a spouse from enforcement actions per se. Then there's a citizenship for children as well. So children of U.S. service members may also qualify for citizenship through specific provisions. Some children may automatically acquire citizenship depending on the circumstances. Others may qualify under the INA 322 while living abroad without having to travel to the U.S. for the naturalization process. So it depends. This one can even go into adopted children or, children gotten through marriage, even if they're not adopted, but you're married to someone with children, and then by virtue of that marriage, the children get it. And then there's a survivor naturalization route. If a service member dies while serving honorably, family members may have special consideration. So INA 319D, which is also applicable when people are outside, B, now this is D, allows surviving spouses, children, or parents to naturalize with some relaxed residence or physical presence requirements if they already had a green card. That's much easier. Now, this recognition applies to families who die during honorable service, like if your service member dies during honorable service, and the provisions recognize that it's just a unique sacrifice, and they aim to honor the family unity. So all these, including PIP, were meant to preserve the military family unity, because if you destabilize a family, readiness is disturbed, retention is disturbed, and national security is disturbed. So that's why there's some of these special considerations for the military.
That was all super helpful. Thank you so much. You've covered so much and you've done such a good job. I would really only add two things. There are certain waivers for inadmissibility that military families can apply for. And this means sometimes people are told they are inadmissible, which means there is something in their history that makes it harder for them to get an immigration benefit. But military families specifically may qualify for special exceptions called waivers that can forgive certain issues, such as being in the US without permission for a period of time, giving incorrect information to immigration officials, whether it was on purpose or not, and some types of criminal history. So when deciding whether or not to approve these waivers, the government looks at how much hardship or serious difficulty your family would face if you were deported, the situation causes for, and the different issues that it could cause the service member or veteran. And then hardship to military family carries a lot of weight. It's important to note that with the current administration, there is a higher standard for a lot of these petitions, like was already mentioned. That's the case with waivers as well. This means that approval rates are lower for immigration benefits. This is why it's so important to hire a qualified immigration attorney as well, to make sure that you have an expert sitting down with you that knows all the facts about your case and can identify any issues like this, as well as any waivers that you may qualify for. And then the last thing I wanted to add were removal-related protections for military families. So if a military spouse or dependent is facing deportation, the government may refer to this as removal. There are several ways to ask the government to pause or stop that deportation process. They can ask ICE to use prosecutorial discretion, which means ICE can agree to close or end the case. They can also ask the immigration judge to temporarily close the case. And this is depending on the situation. The military spouse may qualify for different types of protections, such as a chance to stay in the United States based on long-term residence and hardship to family, protection for people who fear harm in their country. So again, you would have to prove that you are going back to a dangerous situation in your country if you were deported. And then also the ability to apply for a green card through a family member. Some cases can be ended because of military hardship or because the person has been granted military parole in place or deferred action, as were both mentioned previously, both of which are forms of this kind of protection. And the military spouse can also request a stay of removal, which is a temporary pause on deportation. So again, a lot of information there, but I just really want to highlight how important it is to hire a qualified immigration attorney with any case, especially right now, given the different expectations and the standard at which the current administration is processing these cases. And it's just it's a time to be dotting all our I's and crossing all our T's. We really don't want to make any mistakes there. So I really can't stress enough how important it is to get that legal counsel.
Thank you, both of you. To your point, you covered a lot of ground collectively, but all of it just so eye-opening, certainly for those of us who have had the privilege of not needing to learn all of these terms based on personal experience, but even for folks I know that in talking with each and both of you over time, you've expressed how, all of this information isn't necessarily centralized or easy to parse or made proactively available to people for whom it's essential. I think that's a connecting theme between the conversation the three of us are having, the conversation that happened earlier in our event with Libby. These are, in some cases, rights or privileges that we all deserve to know exist and aren't always communicated to in that way. And so I just appreciate both of you for helping bridge that gap and be part of the solution by making this information available to every one of us who should know what is there. I know that other takeaways I certainly have listening to both of you here and as well as in prep is I've been surprised by how much discretion there seems to exist. That while there are policies in place, they're very changeable and they're very much up to an individual or a local location. And I know that theme will come up as we continue, but I just wanted to kind of emphasize that for the audience. Because I know we hear a lot of, what's the answer to X or what's the right way to do Y? And like Libby shared earlier, it depends often. So, and if I can say one more thing, I found it eye-opening and a bit ironic. You pointed out, Lydia, how there are ways that some of these rights and benefits are communicated when in a recruiting context compared to how they turn out in the lived experience. And I think a lot of military spouses can probably relate to a sense of dissonance between this was the poster that was advertised versus this is what it looks like on the ground. That can be applied in any number of ways. And obviously this is an obvious high stakes one. So anyway, just a few things I wanted to kind of emphasize from what you both shared. I would love for, so as I keep an eye on the clock, I'm going to ask one of you to speak to kind of connect our two sections of today's event today. In our first section, we started to talk about, all right, some of us know what the rights are when we are married to someone in the military, but what happens when we start to enter separation or divorce? How does that change things? And I was curious, the intersection, when you go through a process like that, based on different citizenship or documentation statuses, either for you or service member, how does that impact the process? What can separating or divorcing from your service member then impact in terms of your ability to stay in the country or your status, depending on where you are in the process? If one or both of you would be able to kind of talk about that overlap of our two sections today, I would welcome whatever information you have to share. Lydia, I can tell you're eager to join. Please do.
I started over the first time and I gave a lot. So I want to say, if Liliana, you have something here, I'm okay with you starting. But if you're fine with me going, that's fine as well.
Yeah, go for it. You can start this one as well.
Okay. So I've also heard a lot about as we bring this together, and some of the questions we always hear, the citizenship, affect how, whether you have an ID card, your survivor benefits, everything else. So as we talk about benefits and citizenship, and then we bring everything together, first, does citizenship impact dependent ID cards, healthcare access? Absolutely no. The difference might be just maybe in the color of the military ID or something somewhere. And usually sometimes it also depends on the location, because dependent ID cards and access to TRICARE are definitely based on, one, marital status, and two, the service member's eligibility. So non-citizen spouses can receive a dependent ID, base access, healthcare benefits. I speak because I was able to get all those without being a citizen. As long as the marriage is intact and the service member maintains eligibility, where things get complicated is divorce. That is where things get complicated. If a spouse is already a naturalized citizen, divorce does not jeopardize citizenship at all. However, if a spouse is a lawful permanent resident, divorce does not automatically revoke their green card, but it can affect pending petitions for future naturalization timelines. I have had to deal with only one of such cases, thankfully. I hope not more are coming. So if a spouse is in the process of adjusting their status, divorce can significantly complicate or even halt that process. And this is where vulnerability really, I see that become very real. If someone has been out of the workforce due to military moves, and I'm talking about foreign or military spouses here, that's my specialty. That's where I encountered these issues. If their work authorization was delayed, if they don't fully understand immigration requirements, if their status is dependent on a petition filed by their spouse, that creates a power imbalance right there. So in cases, let's say we're talking about abuse, we're talking about things that maybe are beyond, there are protections under, like, let's say VAWA, and I hope VAWA is a Violence Against Women Act, that definitely allows spouses to self-petition without the service member's participation. But keep in mind, knowing these protections exist and having the courage and resources to use them are two different things. You might know them, but how do you even start to apply for them? The system is very, I'm talking about a system that's very intimidating for you. You probably don't have the number. I gave you a few instances. You haven't worked, you authorization, you immigration. How do you even start it? So you're imagining someone in this status, they've not worked for 6-7 years because of the many other things. I don't want to go into all the challenges or the barriers, but at some point, probably at another day. So you might know they exist, but you might not know how to use them, or the courage to, or how to start. And most of the time, you don't even know that they exist, because, as you said, Sarah, nobody is telling you about them. Nobody is telling you, oh, by the way, there's wow. Oh, by the way, there's this. Oh, by the way, there's this. So most of the time, people do not know. Now, legally, non-citizens generally have the same rights in state divorce court as citizens. But fear of immigration consequences generally can prevent someone from asserting those rights. Financial abuse tied to immigration sponsorship usually create coercion. And so while legal rights may exist on paper, access to justice can feel very much unequal in practice. Now, if a service member dies, now let's go into death. Survivors' benefits like dependency, and indemnity compensation, generally DIC, survivor benefit plan, SPP, continued healthcare, do not require a spouse to be a citizen at all. But as I will go back into the knowledge of it. We hear a lot of someone tells you trachea. If you've never heard the word trachea, it feels like an alien kind of thing. SBP, DIC. We are so much acronym based. People talk about PCS. This is for the first time I had PCS. I was like, oh, okay, who's your PCM? And then someone had previously said PCS. So I'm like, PCM. I kept asking myself, why can someone just talk in a call like a sentence that I can understand? So imagine you don't understand some of these things. Acronyms are the order of the day. You're confused most of the time. So they do not require, those benefits, survivor benefits do not require you to be a citizen. However, if immigration status was pending at the time of death, things can be a little bit legally complex because there are humanitarian provisions, but they require navigation and support. And that's often where families are at their most vulnerable. This lady was in California. Her husband had just died. I think that was in Afghanistan, or was it Kuwait? I think Afghanistan. And she was referred to us by a different organization, not even within the military. Just someone just heard of us from a card that they were given by someone's like, oh, I think this is someone who might need your help and something like that. By the time we were even trying to get to her, it was a whole different situation. She was already in hospital. She had been admitted for severe anxiety attacks because she had depended on her husband fully 100% for the last 9 to 10 years. 9 to 10 years. She had no job. You know how it is hard for someone to come from, and she was a pilot, by the way. I won't say her origin country. She had good qualifications, but one challenge after another, she couldn't get employment. And we see this a lot with foreign-born military spouses. So they become very vulnerable because they don't know what else to do. I don't know what else. I don't even know where to start. I don't know whether it's VA. I don't know. Even VA is a whole other thing. You know, you don't know where the papers are. You don't know. So you're figuring out if they bring them here, where am I going to take them? A funeral home? And where am I, it's a lot of something for someone to really navigate. And it also requires a knowledge on what to do. And that is where we come in as FMSN, because we at least understand, and there are people in the community who also understand, have been there, or even if they don't, they are so happy to figure out and dig and try to ask around, and we will get some answers for you. So if there's anything if you don't take anything away from what I'm saying today, please find your community. And for foreign-born spouses, I can always tell the difference when they get into the community and feel a sense of relief, a huge sigh of, you can see in how they post, how they behave after that, just feeling a sense of, oh, I'm home. These people understand my situation. Or even if they might not understand, they will try to help me in any way that they can. So Liliana, anything you want to add on there? I've tried to cover the whole spectrum.
No, that was great. The only thing I wanted to add in reference to the immigration benefits for surviving family members, like Lydia said, that there are benefits that can be received even after the military active military family member passes away. So for example, if the surviving spouse already has a green card, they may be able to become US citizens right away instead of waiting the usual wait periods, whether that be 3 or 5 years. Like Lydia said, that may vary depending on your specific situation. And that time can be skipped if the military spouse does pass away. And then also some benefits can apply even if the service member has passed away before any immigration paperwork was filed in the first place. But that doesn't mean it's easy. You know, like Lydia said, there are long wait times. Who is in office or the administration can change a lot about what happens within immigration itself as far as processing times, standards, which I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I just really can't emphasize enough how important it is to make sure we're not going to our family member who, filed their own immigration paperwork 20 years ago or 10 years ago, and expect them to understand the standards of today, and to understand these processes. In the Hispanic community, we hear a lot about notarios, going to people that are notaries in Latin America that come to the United States and claim, to be able to do things and file immigration paperwork and other types of paperwork. And unfortunately, in a lot of cases, we see that the notarios do not have the knowledge and experience to fill out this paperwork accurately. And in the end, the individual applying for the immigration benefits can be very severely negatively impacted because of those mistakes that were made. So again, just really wanting to emphasize that it's not easy, and there is a lot that we need to know, which is why that legal expertise is so important.
Absolutely. Oh, great advice. Thank you both. Lydia, when you talk about vulnerability, I think that word really stuck out to me when you were sharing how vulnerable the situations and the systems that individuals find themselves in make them and keep them. And that is a common theme across the previous section, this section, lots of areas that we touch on here at SFI. And so I just really appreciate you bringing that to the forefront. And that was great closing advice, Liliana, about we welcome broken records if they're giving useful mantras that we remind ourselves of, that to include to get important counsel that is accurate and up to date. I'm going to draw us close to a close of this section. And to do so, Liliana, I know you've prepared some slides, which I have ready to share on my screen. You're going to give us some know your rights information. So these are practical, take with you as you go, tips and recommendations for some key situations. And then after that presentation, Lydia, if you have any closing remarks, I'll give you the chance to do so then. So with that, let me get my screen all set. Give me 1 second.
Great. Thanks, Sarah.
Of course.
Yeah, like Sarah mentioned, I did prepare these slides, especially because it may be helpful to have. Wanted to make sure the information was accessible to the participants today and in the future. It is important to include the date here in the title just to be able to reference, because things can change so much day to day. And so as if you use this in the future and as you reference it, please note the date and realize that things may have changed. But yes, next slide, please. So first of all, I wanted to touch a little bit on military installation protections that currently exist for families. So immigration enforcement on military bases is extremely rare, and access depends on the relationship between the base and the immigration agencies. You can think of it as a spectrum. On one end, ICE may be completely denied access, meaning they cannot enter the base at all without the commander's permission. In the middle, some bases have informal or formal agreements with ICE, and these can range from case-by-case permission or even other types of agreements or understandings to standing agreements that outlines when ICE can come onto the installation. So again, it could be for specific instances only. On the far end of the spectrum, which is not the current situation, by the way, the president or the Secretary of Defense could give ICE blanket permission to enter all bases without local approval. This is legally possible. It is not in place today, meaning the president and the Secretary of Defense have not done this today. But just wanted to make everyone aware of this possibility. But because bases are controlled access environments, families living on base generally have additional layers of protection from unexpected enforcement actions in comparison to individuals that live off base, right, where there isn't that extra layer of security to enter their neighborhoods. So just some things to keep in mind here. Again, it is important to know to find out in a safe manner, if there are any agreements between your base and ICE, and hopefully in the future we can have better ways of tracking this, so families aren't put in a vulnerable decision where they have to go and ask themselves, and perhaps have any unwanted attention on what their immigration status may be. Next slide, please. Now here on the left, I have a QR code that you can scan with your camera that takes you to an emergency preparedness plan. And then on the right here, you can see another resource that is a lot more brief, you could say, and easier to carry around with you. But every family, no matter their immigration status, should have an emergency plan, even just thinking about natural disasters, potential deportations. Emergency plans are very important. This includes choosing trusted adults who can care for children if something unexpected happens, gathering important documents, and making sure everyone knows who to contact in an emergency. So again, on the screen here, I'm sharing resources from the American Immigration Lawyers Association and the Immigration Legal Resources Center. And you can access these to basically walk your family through the steps of how to create this plan. You can either fill it out as a PDF online or print and fill out manually. And this AILA document, again, is a more comprehensive short version of it. And then the website that's referenced at the bottom of the AILA document is the American Immigration Lawyers Association website that helps you find a trustworthy immigration attorney in your area. Because again, that is always very, very important to have, especially today. Next slide, please. Knowing your rights when confronted by ICE. I have another QR code here for you all to scan. And this is a PDF document that you can have on your phone or print out that kind of highlights the rights that you have when you are confronted by ICE to keep in mind when in any interactions with them. This document will mention that everyone in the United States has basic rights regardless of immigration status. You can always ask, am I free to go? If the officer says yes, you can calmly leave. Again, don't run. This could give them reason to arrest you. But leaving calmly, you do have the right to remain silent and the right to speak with a lawyer. If officers come to your home, you do not have to open the door. You can ask if they have a warrant, and this warrant needs to be signed by a judge in order to be valid, and it must have your name and the correct address. The best way to see this warrant and to check the information is to have them hold it up against the window, for example, or ask them to slide it under the door so that you can review it safely without, opening the door and having that become more confrontational. So those are some safe ways to review that warrant information when approached, especially if they come to your door. It's important to never carry any false documents or lie to officers. That can create some very serious legal problems. And if you are stopped, you can give them your name, date of birth, and if you have valid immigration documents, you can show them. I think oftentimes on social media, we highlight that people have the right to remain silent, but it's actually really beneficial if you do have legal status to be able to say that and to prove that as well, so that you aren't targeted unnecessarily or questioned wrongly for longer than needed. And it's also very important that you do not sign anything you don't understand. So those are just some things to mention. Next slide, please. And then here are just some things to consider when going to the airport. We have different groups within the airport: TSA security, CBP inspection, and secondary inspection. And here's just a little bit about the differences between these three organizations. For sake of time, I'm not going to dive into them, but here we'll make sure to share these out so people can reference. But it's just important to know who you're interacting with and the best way to communicate with them. Next slide, please. And then just lastly, some special considerations for military families at the airport. It's always important to keep passports, green cards, and any orders with you in your carry-on so that they're easily accessible if immigration asks for them. Always consult with an attorney before international travel if you're unsure if it could cause any issues to pending petitions or your current immigration status. And then carrying copies of military orders, marriage, and birth certificates may also be helpful, especially if your immigration status depended on marriage or relationship between a child and parent. And then bringing your dependent ID with you is always helpful. And then keeping immigration documents in your carry-on as well, such as pending USCIS receipts for a pending case to prove that you have a case that's pending. And if questioned, you may say, "I'd like to speak with an attorney before answering further questions." And again, just making sure that you are aware of those rights and respond calmly in those situations. But yeah, just wanted to share that.
Thank you so much, Liliana. All right, folks, as I look at the clock, I'm going to call a bit of an audible, and I'm going to change the order of our speakers right now to hand it back to Brandy Jones. She is, again, the visionary behind this event, and I'm going to give Brandy the opportunity to share some closing framing remarks as we wrap to a close. Liliana, thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Sarah, Shalina, Libby, Liliana, Lydia, everyone who tuned in today. I hope that we all learned something together. And I just want to say, this is just the first series of a two-part series talking about knowing our rights as military families. So tonight we have laid the groundwork. We've talked through legal identity and rights stemming from military marriage and immigration vulnerabilities. And in part two, towards the end of March, we're going to build on this foundation. We're going to focus on economic justice, labor rights, civil rights protections, and remedies. I just want to say thank you, everyone who showed up and for your courage to talk about these issues and your vulnerability again. Not just for yourself, you're sharing, but you're sharing for others. And I just really appreciate your time, everyone who participated today. So please tune in next month.
Yes.
Thank you, Sarah.
Absolutely. Thank you, Brandy. And as always, we encourage you to plug in with SFI as you're able. We've got caucuses where a lot of conversations happen at the community level. If you're not a member of a caucus, I strongly encourage you to sign up for one today. We also have leadership teams. We've got folks who focus on carrying some of the conversation that we have today toward collective policy change. Our PCS safety campaign is one great example that works on a lot of the issues we touched on today. So please, if you're able to sign up for a leadership team, strongly encourage you to do so. And of course, becoming an SFI member, joining monthly member calls, and getting our emails is a great way to stay in touch regardless. So we hope to see you at the end of March, and we hope to see you on more member events coming up. Thank you very much.